In the whimsical town of Whimsyville, nestled between rolling green hills and a river made entirely of soda, lived the greatest, most eccentric inventor the world had ever known, Professor Pudding. He was a jolly, round man with a wild tuft of hair that looked like cotton candy and an obsession with the most peculiar inventions. His house was a hodgepodge of pipes, gears, and oddly shaped chimneys, each puffing out pastel-colored smoke, and every window had a little face painted on it that smiled at passers-by. Professor Pudding was known for his weird inventions: a self-buttering toast machine, a pencil that never needed sharpening, and a hat that dispensed cookies on command. But his latest invention was, as he declared with much fanfare, the most stupendous, revolutionary, and utterly preposterous creation ever conceived by a human mind. It was, in his words, the invisible underwear. The idea came to him one afternoon as he was lounging in his giant teacup bathtub, musing about how traditional underwear lacked flair and mystique. He reasoned that if clothing could be invisible, it would save countless minutes each morning. No more deciding what to wear. Plus, the appeal of invisible underwear was obvious, at least to him. You could wear your most stylish outfits without worrying about unsightly lines. After months of tinkering with his invisibility ray sewing machine and a very confused cat named Sir Whiskers, he finally succeeded. He held up a pair of what appeared to be ordinary underwear. "Aha!" he exclaimed to Sir Whiskers, who was more interested in chasing a laser pointer. "Behold the invisible underwear. Once worn, it becomes completely undetectable." With his invention complete, Professor Pudding wasted no time. He put on a pair and strutted around his house, admiring his apparent state of undress. Marvelous, absolutely marvelous, he chuckled to himself, convinced that he was the pinnacle of inventiveness. However, there was one tiny, teensy-weensy problem that Professor Pudding had overlooked. The underwear was not invisible, it was just, well, not there. In his excitement, he had completely forgotten to actually make them invisible. And what he thought were some invisible garments were, in reality, nothing at all. Blissfully unaware of this oversight, Professor Pudding decided it was time to reveal his latest masterpiece to the town. He put on his favorite bright green suspenders, a polka-dotted bow tie, and the so-called invisible underwear, and marched down to the Whimsyville Annual Inventors Fair. The fair was in full swing when Professor Pudding arrived, a carnival of quirky inventions and excited chatter. There was Mr. Fizzlepop with his fizzy drink that changed colours and Miss Tickles with her tickle-free feather dusters. But all eyes turned to Professor Pudding as he took to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and creatures of indeterminate origin," he boomed into the microphone. "Prepare to have your minds blown and your socks knocked off by my latest and greatest invention, the invisible underwear." The crowd leaned in, eager to see what ridiculousness Professor Pudding had concocted this time. He did a little spin, puffed out his chest, and struck a pose. "As you can see, I am wearing them right now." The crowd blinked. One person in the back dropped their cotton candy. Miss Tickles gasped, and Mr. Fizzlepop dropped his fizzy drink, which turned a deep shade of embarrassed pink. Professor Pudding, still oblivious, continued his speech. "Imagine the possibilities. You'll never have to worry about what to wear again. No more unsightly lines, no more wardrobe malfunctions, no more— Professor," interrupted Mr. Fizzlepop, nervously clearing his throat. "Are you sure you're wearing anything?" The professor laughed heartily. Of course, it's invisible, my good man. That's the whole point." It was at that moment that Sir Whiskers, who had followed the professor to the fair, decided it was the perfect time to play with the professor's bow tie. With a pounce and a tug, the bow tie snapped off, leaving Professor Pudding in just his green suspenders and what he proudly believed to be invisible underwear. "See?" Professor Pudding gestured grandly. "Completely invisible." The crowd erupted into a mix of laughter, gasps, and a few muffled screams. Realization finally dawned on Professor Pudding. He looked down and saw nothing. Oh, his face turned as red as a strawberry sundae. In his rush to perfect the invention, he had forgotten to actually make them. Without missing a beat, and ever the showman, Professor Pudding stood up tall, spread his arms wide, and declared, "Behold the freedom of the human form, a bold new fashion statement for the modern era." The audience was in stitches. Laughter echoed through the fairgrounds, tears of hilarity streaming down faces. Even Mr. Fizzlepop, who was usually the most serious of the bunch, was doubled over, clutching his sides. Miss Tickles was laughing so hard she had to sit down, and Sir Whiskers, the unsuspecting catalyst of the whole debacle, simply batted at the bow tie with satisfaction. Seeing the uproarious reaction, Professor Pudding couldn't help but chuckle himself. Well, I suppose even the greatest of minds have a slip-up. He gave a cheeky wink, and the crowd cheered, applauding the professor for turning his mishap into a moment of sheer entertainment. From that day on, the invisible underwear incident became the stuff of legend in Whimsyville. Children sang songs about it, inventors swapped exaggerated versions of the tale, and Professor Pudding was, unsurprisingly, crowned as the town's official King of Quirkiness. He wore his title with pride, though he made sure to double-check his wardrobe before every public appearance thereafter. And thus, Professor Pudding continued his inventing, never quite living down the invisible underwear fiasco, but embracing every new day with a grin, a bow tie, and thankfully, a fully visible pair of pants. Make the background music happy.